feel free to depart from them. I don't know if it's very helpful. I mean, just a rough outline.
And,
yeah, sure.
And Matt, a good press release on all the CARES grant stuff too. So
that was great. Yeah, great. We've been getting some great statements too from grantees about impact. So once we've collected them, then we can
the YouTube.
Okay, yeah, are we ready to go?
Just about.
Okay.
Sure.
and Matt, a good.
Hey, Brandon.
Hi, Susie. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Is it just you and me?
No, Ken and our board chair, Arif Khan, are on.
Okay.
All right, Ken, we are live on YouTube, so I'll stop sharing my screen.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Starting Conversations on this very hazy afternoon in Albuquerque. Thank you for joining us and spending a little time with the New Mexico Humanities Council. Today, my guests are Brandon Johnson, the Executive Director of the New Mexico Humanities Council, and Arif Khan, our Board President and the Director of the UNM Museum. We're going to have a discussion about the humanities in general, the New Mexico Humanities Council, and a little bit about the organization, our mission, and how we work. So we'd like to make this a little more of a free-ranging conversation, and just like the title of the program implies, make it a real conversation with all of you. So if you're listening, please feel free to send your chats using the chat function, which, as you know, because we're all Zoom experts by now, is at the bottom of your screen. You could click that and send your chats, and my colleague Matt Garcia Sierra will be receiving those chats and will relay them to us in the form of your questions or comments. And please feel free to do that at any time. Or if you'd like to do the live virtual version of the same, please raise your hand and we will introduce you into the conversation at the appropriate time. So again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to start with a question to Brandon, a little bit biographical in nature, but maybe Brandon, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us just a little bit about what oriented you to a career in the public humanities and maybe how that career got launched.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. So as Ken mentioned, I'm Brandon Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the Humanities Council. I've been doing this for a while now. Let's see, it would be 3 years in August. I grew up in the West. I grew up in Utah and was very interested in the stories that surrounded my community. Sort of, you know, why my town, which is, you know, smallish Utah town, how it got started, you know, how it grew. I was also really interested in the history of my family. Some of my ancestors were early settlers in my town. So that got me started thinking about history. And I decided to go into history with the intention of being a professor. I thought that was kind of seemed like a really cool thing to do. You know, be able to tell stories and get young people interested in what I enjoyed. So I studied history, finished a PhD in history. About halfway through my time working on my doctorate, I realized maybe I didn't want to be a professor. And so then you know, when you confront that reality, you sort of have to think about, well, you know, I still need to be gainfully employed. Now what do I do? And I started getting involved in creation. I did some research and put together an exhibit at the University of Chicago where I was getting my doctorate. And that sort of started me down this road of public humanities, which is really public history in particular, but which is really about providing humanities experiences to a broader public, not just students or faculty colleagues. So I did that. I eventually got a job at the Utah Humanities Council, worked for a short time for the federal government at the National Endowment for the Humanities. And about that time, I really wanted to move back west, and as did my spouse and our kids. So the job as director of the New Mexico Council came open. I applied for it, and fortunately, I got it. And here now, and I love New Mexico. I love the cultural life of New Mexico, and this really is a good fit for someone like me who really is invested in public humanities work.
Great. Well, before we get to the mission of the organization, let me throw a version of the same question over to Arif. Arif, your background is in museum administration and curation, which is also a form of public humanities work. And what triggered your interest in that, and how did you get connected with the New Mexico Humanities Council?
Thanks, Ken, and Brandon, and everyone who's participating today. Again, I'm Arif Khan, and my day job, I'm the director of the UNM Art Museum, and I've been on the Humanities Council board for, I think, about 3 years. And I've taken on the mantle of board chair, I think, right when the pandemic was starting. So interesting time indeed to be, I think, on any board, but also thinking about how, as a chair, how we can engage the board in these times has been interesting. But getting to Ken's question about my interest in the humanities and my background, I actually, I'm a first generation American. My father's from India, my mom's from England. They moved to this country. They didn't want to raise a mixed family in England in the 70s. That was not the most kosher thing for society at that time. Didn't know anybody in the United States, so pure immigrant story. And they ended up in Albuquerque, of all places, moved here when I was about 2 years old. So I grew up here in Albuquerque. And for me, the humanities were a way for me to kind of learn a lot about the country I was growing up in. My parents did not have their own experiences to share with America. Education was really important for us, so went to the library all the time, read as many books as we could. And history, like similar to Brandon, was kind of my focus in college. I went to a liberal arts school, so I had to do a little bit of all humanities. So art was always an interest, which I think came out from me growing up in New Mexico. But I worked at the Atlanta History Center, was my first job out of college. I worked in the photo archives and got to catalog their Civil War collection of photography, as well as a photojournalist who worked at the local paper from like the 50s through the 90s, which was an amazing time of history that was happening in Atlanta. And then did my master's degree at UNM with art history and American studies and history focus. My actual only art degree is a business one. I lived in London at Sotheby's Institute, did their program, and came back here looking for work, and most of my jobs actually were in New Mexico. I worked for Indian Market for a time, which was crazy. I was the artist coordinator there, so was responsible for 1,200 artists. Was the gallery director at Tamarind Institute, which is here in Albuquerque at UNM. Moved away to West Virginia, of all places, and was running the art programs at a big cultural center that had performing arts, a planetarium, kind of a kids hands-on center, and I ran the museum component of that. And then came back to Albuquerque about 4 years ago to be the director at the UNM Art Museum, which is somewhere I studied when I was a student and is a kind of a personal honor for me to direct that institution, which has a really great history. So that's a very rapid bio for me. Again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, isn't it, that the humanities seems to be such a capacious catch-all, and yet something that goes back really to Renaissance education. It's sort of where education, the idea of being a humanist, really takes us back to the origins of formal education as we think of it, and classical sciences and all the disciplines that really make us who we are. I'm going to pivot to our mission a little bit as an organization and how we function in the state of New Mexico. And I would like to encourage those who are listening and watching to think about your own relationship with the humanities. What intrigues you about what the New Mexico Humanities Council does? What thoughts might you have about what else we might do? And as I try to speak and share a screen at the same time, I'm going to invite Brandon and Arif to lead us in a discussion about the mission of the council and what we do. Can we see the slides? Are they up?
Yeah, I can see them.
Good.
So did you have a particular question, or should we just?
Well, let's start with our mission statement to support public programs in New Mexico communities, which inspire inclusive conversations, strengthen our civil society, and celebrate diverse human experiences. What an interesting time to be thinking about a mission that inspires inclusive conversations.
Right.
It's got to be a challenge really at almost any time, but I suppose it's hard to think about addressing that mission without taking note of the very divisive, polarized, and contentious discourse that we're surrounded with at all times.
That's true, and it's what makes working for the Humanities Council so interesting. It allows us to think creatively about how we can do this kind of work, bring people together to talk about things that are of importance, contemporary things of contemporary interest, and as well as how the past can inform conversations about what's in front of us today. I mean, in some ways, we're lucky in that we're a nonpartisan organization, and we seek to provide balance and context. We're not really interested in debating opinion, but rather providing people with an opportunity to learn about the past, the present, the future, and about things that concern them in their own communities. So for instance, if we wanted to talk about land use in New Mexico, which I think is an important topic, or water use for that matter, how we use water and how water is apportioned, in communities. It pays, I think, to try to delve into the history of those topics, right? How was water regime in New Mexico first structured among Native groups, and then later on, how did the Spanish who came into the area and as colonizers, how did they reshape or reformulate the water regime? And so, when we do that, we're talking about the past. We're thinking about how it influences the present. What we don't do is we don't take a side, and we don't say, well, this is the best way to structure the use of water in New Mexico or land use. We're in the business of providing context and thoughtful, informed discussion from that contextualization, if that makes sense.
It does, and it seems like a great challenge because I think that kind of civil discourse is in short supply. It's almost impossible to turn to the usual sources, journalists or people that govern most of the mainstream discourse without even getting into social media and find anything like a balanced perspective, right? We're bombarded by opinions and misinformation so often that to be able to return to a way of not debating, but considering and reflecting about some of the underlying issues.
Yeah, that's, I'm glad you brought that up, kind of the looking for trusted sources. There's a, of course, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but there was some recent studies that I think they keep updating that I use a lot when I'm talking with donors or even students that it's like audience surveys that museums and cultural institutions, especially ones that are located in your local community, are looked at in more as trusted sources of information, regardless of the topic, obviously their topic interests, but you know, and that's a nationwide survey. So I think, you know, institutions like the Humanities Councils, museums, the local institutions that the Humanities Council supports and works with, you know, we're in the biz, so we know that they're looked at as trusted things, but the data out there also supports that. I think people feel comfortable with institutions such as the council having these conversations or being moderators for them. So
There was a time when I think I remember reading a survey that Walter Cronkite was considered the most trusted man in the United States of America at whatever point that was, and I'm not sure that. I'm just getting a message that my screen share is showing the PowerPoint outline, not the slideshow. I'm sorry, everyone. Let me see if I can adjust that. I hope that's correct now. Interrupted my thought, but that Walter Cronkite was once considered to be the most trusted, or one of the most trusted people in the United States. I'm not sure that any journalist would be assigned that lofty position at this point, which is maybe an indication of the necessity of the humanities and for carefully considered discourse. Arif, could I follow up on your answer with a question to consider with us the role of a nonprofit board? I know you have quite a lot of experience with all aspects of nonprofit administration, and with something like the Humanities Council, where we're a state agency as part of a federal association of humanities councils. How do you see the role of the board in being a board president in helping shape our mission, our message today?
Well, prior to the Humanities Council board, most of my experience was actually on the other side. I've worked for nonprofits and have worked with boards, you know, as a staff member and things like that. And I think from that experience, when I was asked to serve on the board, I always tried to channel, you know, if anyone has done board work, they're the board members who are, you know, the staff looks to as the ones who they really lean on for support, the good ones, right? And so I had some behavior I was trying to model, but really what attracted me to the council, which is I think rare, I think anywhere, is that it's a true statewide organization. You know, there's, of course, working on your local institutions boards is great, but I felt if I was going to volunteer my time, I think something that benefited the whole state was something that attracted me. It's also been a great way for me to learn about a lot of these communities in New Mexico, even though you grew up here with such a large, geographically diverse state that, you know, it's been really rewarding to learn so much about it. So as I mentioned, my time as a board chair came at a really COVID jumped right in there. So, you know, especially in the early days, had lots of conversations with Brandon about, you know, what the council should do, what are plans, especially when things were so uncertain. You know, as board president, I hope Brandon sees the same way, that I'm here for someone he can bounce ideas off of, get advice, just someone to talk to if he's having a bad day, or things like that. Helping with communications with the board members. A thing we've been really emphasizing since I've been on the board is trying to get representation from throughout the state. And I think that's something right now. We have quite a few new board members, and our distribution, I think, is really representative of such a large state. So yeah, those are those kind of examples. I think the board as a whole, I hope board members serve on various committees, help look at grants. I hope the staff feels like it can reach out to certain board members for expertise if they need it. And everyone says board governance. I look at it as more of like, we're here to support the work of what the council wants to do. The staff are there every day doing the real work, and we're here to help support, advise, and cheer. So.
Well, the staff is, oh, I just heard somebody, maybe they were Zoom bombing us from a neighboring state or something. The staff is delighted to hear about your support of all of the work. Let's talk about the grants committee a little bit. We just finished a large distribution of CARES Act money, which hopefully went to, well, I know it went to, I think, was it 68 were the recipients, Brandon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was sort of a very large gift from the federal government that landed in our laps with the intent of providing support during this difficult time. And yeah, we re-granted more than $430,000 in federal dollars to organizations, cultural organizations around the state. Something that I'm very proud of, and I'm thankful that we could provide that kind of service.
It's one of the really important things about the Humanities Council in New Mexico, isn't it? That we are able to do things at a scale and statewide that I think it would be very challenging for any other agency or organization to really be able to do.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Arif's point about it being statewide, we are in this special position. I think every state and as well as the territories, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and others. Each of them has a state or territorial humanities council, and that really this kind of work is the bread and butter of the councils, getting money, re-granting money from the federal government to small institutions in our states. And that's how we all started. Back in the 60s, the State Humanities Council started strictly as re-granting institutions, and then we've taken on other things over the years.
When was the NEH founded?
It was in 1965. It was a program of, or it was a bill that was introduced during Lyndon Johnson's time during his administration, amongst many other things that he was sort of supporting or working to enact. He was also looking toward the arts and humanities, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts, both started together. It wasn't until a few years later, early 70s, that the state humanities councils got their start. So this was something that people at NEH and others in Congress were thinking about. So they were trying to think about how they could provide more support for smaller institutions in the individual states. NEH was doing a lot of work in terms of, they were supporting research agendas, big projects, people talk about the King Tut exhibit, for instance. And it's, almost everyone had a chance to see the King Tut exhibit in the 70s and 80s. So they were doing sort of that kind of work. And people at NEH finally, they did some pilot projects in the States to try and find a way to create affiliate organizations, and those affiliate organizations became the state humanities councils, and we've been providing that kind of support to our folks in our own backyard for decades now.
I think about the NEA, and I wonder how many Americans first became aware of the National Endowment for the Arts during those controversial years under the Reagan administration with the NEA 4. It seems like perhaps any form of government spending, art can be very polarizing. Did that affect the NEH in any way?
It did. I mean, NEA and NEH have been sort of joined at the hip since the 60s, since the enacting legislation. Although the humanities, the NEH, for sort of purposes of self-preservation, I guess you could say, tried to distance itself from NEA at that particular time. And the NEH began its commission, or its mission, or it changed its message, I guess you could say, to make sure that the public and policymakers understood that they were primarily about research and not about art, not about providing support to individual artists. And of course, NEA also began doing that. They began moving away from supporting individual artists. But yeah. I wonder, Arif, do you remember, or did you in your work, did that story of NEA end up being something that people recalled and sort of were concerned about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, showing my age a little bit, but most of my career was in a post NEA crisis mode. So I did not know of the glory years, if you want to call it that. So, and that was something I studied in school. That still is a case study when you're talking about public art and funding and administration. That is still a situation that students learn about today. For example, for what the NEA used to be able to do, there are artists here in New Mexico I know who received personal support of their work. That did not result in an end exhibit or some product. It was simply supporting artists. Another example, which I think gets a little less attention, is they would also supply acquisition funds for small museums throughout the country. The UNM Art Museum, actually, we have received several grants from the NEA in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s to buy art to build a collection. And we still, when we show those works, we acknowledge where those funds came from. That's gone. I have not existed in that NEA environment. So I think the mission or how the funds get deployed is very different than it used to be. I think there was the oversight mechanisms and all of that due to the controversies and the international press that came out of it, I think has really changed in how that field is done. And as I said, I think for folks who straddled those eras, I think that was a tough transition for them, because I think a lot of institutions relied on some of those more unrestricted aspects of the funds. But for me personally, I've existed in the restricted era, so that's just how I've been used to.
For those of you watching or listening, if you don't remember, or if you're too young to remember the the story of the NEA 4. I won't take a lot of time to talk about it now, except that it focused on 4 artists who were doing very provocative work that was identity and gender based for the most part. It was in the during the AIDS crisis, the last pandemic, and raised enough hackles that it caused many people, I won't just say politicians, but many to question the role of government support for the arts, and brought up a lot of interesting free speech versus expenditure of tax dollars questions that resonate today and probably will for the foreseeable future. And as Arif and Brandon both alluded to, funding protocols and priorities shifted after that, and in a way that still affects us. And I think, would it be fair to say that that's something, that a situation that exists in the United States in a way that might be different than, say, European countries, other nations' ways of going about the idea of arts and culture funding?
I think so, but it's hard to, I haven't worked in any other country. I haven't spent any part of my career in Germany or Canada or the UK, but anecdotally, I've heard, my supervisor at NEH when I worked there had spent part of her career in Germany. And then she worked here in a couple of museums, and then finally I worked with her at NEH, and she was unused to the being on pins and needles, right, during the lead up to the appropriation kind of the process that Congress would go through to make appropriations for the cultural agencies. And she eventually moved back to Germany, and I think she or that sort of model of where the governmental support for culture is just assumed, right? It's an kind of, for her, was an easier place to be. I can't say that during those times when I was working there, and then also here leading the Humanities Council, that there are those moments where, or those periods of time, I guess you could say, where we're watching very closely what's going on in Congress to see where our appropriation might be. It can be discomfiting, and I don't relish those times, but I do feel confident that the cultural agencies, and by extension, the Humanities Councils, do have a lot of goodwill on both sides of the aisle. People, I think, overall understand the importance of the arts and humanities and want to get behind them. And we, as the CARES Act has shown, there are a lot of cultural organizations in our own state and in other states that have been able to keep their doors open, essentially, because of that extra support from Congress.
I also think those questions you were asking, Ken, are interesting for us here in New Mexico, and that we actually are our cultural situation is more like Europe than I think the rest of the country. Department of Cultural Affairs, we have multiple museums throughout the state that are state funded, state employees. University Museum arguably is one of those as well. And I think, Brent and I have talked about this a little bit too, of how the role, I think, of the Humanities Council here, because of that state apparatus, gets interesting as well, of like how to direct those funds, interaction with the state. For example, our counterparts for the NEA is New Mexico Arts. That's embedded within state government. They are part of the state agency. So I mean, if you're into arts administration, New Mexico is actually a really interesting case study compared to how other parts of most of the rest of the country is actually organized.
We have a wonderful question that just came in from Michelle, and I'm going to read it exactly verbatim because it's so well phrased. Most of us know the humanities when we see them, but why is there a conceptual confusion that still exists about what the humanities are and the reason for studying them in the first place? This is where we get to define what the humanities are that we said we would absolutely not do as part of this meeting. But
Maybe we should just ask.
I'm having flashbacks to doing that mission statement, Brandon.
That's right. That's right. Maybe we should ask Michelle to answer that question. Maybe she can answer it for us. So as I understand it, Ken, the question really is about definitions. Is that fair to say?
Or another way of putting it is, why does the Wikipedia page for the humanities say that all of the arts are part of the humanities? The arts have been subsumed into the belly of this entirely distinct discipline with a separate government program attached to it.
Yeah. Well, I think the bifurcation, right, is an artifact of legislation or bureaucracy primarily, right, in the United States, and by extension, the state. I mean, New Mexico has a Humanities Council and it has an Arts Council, and the Arts Council happens to be a government agency that also receives federal money, and the Humanities Council is a nonprofit, and that was the model that was chosen back in the 70s for the Humanities Councils. And we also receive federal money. I would argue that the Humanities Councils have a little bit more flexibility in how it deploys its funds. I've always seen that, and Arif can chime in sort of how he sees that bifurcation. But I've always thought of the distinction, the arts humanities distinction, as being somewhat artificial, right? That the two are really interwoven, and when we say that so the humanities you can sort of talk about the humanities as a list of disciplines, so you talk about history, philosophy, ethics, and then you get to sort of the arts adjacent elements of the humanities, which are art history, art criticism, right? So it's talking about art, educating about art, but not supporting the production of art. And like I say, I mean, that seems somewhat artificial. I mean, I think it's difficult to talk about, say, a piece of visual art, without having some engagement with the art itself, right? And you're to a museum or to a gallery or in the case of the performing arts, an auditorium. And I think it would be very difficult to to use another example from the arts, a theater piece, right, without seeing the theater piece staged, right? I mean, how do you sort of talk about its meaning, the influences on the influences on the playwright? How do you do that without seeing it performed? But the way that I would say permeable boundary that I think is there, others in power won't always see it that way, right? And that it ebbs and flows. Some chairmen of the National Endowment for the Humanities see it as more permeable than others, and we sort of have to work within the structure that's there. But overall, I would rather see more cross-fertilization and sort of reaching across that boundary if we can. What do you think, Arif? Am I off base?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about this as well. I agree with what you said. The defining of the humanities, it's such a broad concept, and I think the default is the listing of the disciplines. As Michelle mentioned in her question, you know it when you see it, but how to succinctly define it down. I think the split between the arts and the humanities is also reflected. I think that's reflected from university structures as well. I'm at UNM. I'm part of the College of Fine Arts, which has art history and theater and dance and film and photography and all that stuff. However, there's a College of Arts and Sciences. There's no arts in the arts and sciences. That's English, but that's such under that one umbrella that includes all of the sciences, as well as English, all foreign languages, anthropology. So I think when I was in school, I never really thought about it, but now that I'm there, I'm like, why is it called the College of Arts and Sciences? Components there. But I do know that it can be a struggle, I think, for the Humanities Council for folks, is either maybe the popular conception is it is like this academic type of thing, right? It's for scholars, or and it's not something that can engage you with your everyday life. And I do applaud what the council has done by supporting institutions that are trying to, bring that into their communities. That, for example, what types of food you eat and the history of it, that is humanities. History of the clothes that you wear, that is something that can be the humanities. The music you listen to, all those type of things. I think it's how you frame a subject matter and the context that you put in it can help with that definition, even though it's hard to maybe get that written down succinctly. I know, Michelle, I see your name there if you wanted to.
Yeah, I guess, this is I could be off on this, but it just seems that, the humanities have both left and right defenders of, what the humanities are. And it just seems that, when you have sort of the critics of the humanities, that they are really sort of successful, right, at making the case to that the humanities are not important, that they're not essential to our lives. And I just wonder, why is it that it has become so politicized? And also when we make the case for the humanities and defend the humanities, that is not as heard, as loud as the criticism for the humanities or the case against the humanities. I don't know if that can be answered, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that one, but it seems like when you have sort of conservative views of the humanities, they get more exposure on the not need or the importance of humanities. I think too, I think universities or scholars or academics kind of get sort of in the middle of that, right? I don't know. So, not a very articulate question, but you know what
It's a very provocative question, though, and it connects up with another one that came in. So I'm gonna attempt to roll them together. Wondering about the impact of the Humanities Council within the state of New Mexico, and the question is, why is the organization not more well known compared to how long it has existed? I'm sure there's a lot to say about that, but maybe there's a way of couching it also in terms of our ongoing mission and challenges, and how we address those within education, within what we do.
Well, that question actually was something that we took up a couple years ago as part of our strategic planning. I was new. There was a new board chair, the board chair that preceded Arif. We were at a moment where we could, kind of take stock of where we were, and that was an important question for us, and something that we continue to chew on. Are we providing? So the way that we were thinking of it was, are we providing relevant opportunities for people? Are we relevant in people's lives? And some of the answers that came out of that probing have been our kind of touchstones for thinking about programming. You know, for instance, are we how much are we thinking about you know, bilingual programs, or you know, where we're not just doing programming in English but also in Spanish? Of course, you know, a large percentage of residents of New Mexico are Spanish speaking, and are we providing opportunities for them to engage with, you know, history, literature, those, you know, the things that make us human, right? And, you know, I mean, the thing is that it's, you know, while we are small and I think flexible, we're also small and only, you know, only a few people. So the flexibility on the one hand is a good thing, but on the other hand, you know, we don't have deep pockets, and we have to sort of think about how to, think creatively about how to take on this issue of relevance or visibility in New Mexico. I think one thing we did address early on after going through that process was finding someone who could help us, a communications professional who could help us kind of engage in social media. I think I'm the last person you'd want to ask about how to, you know, build an audience on Twitter or Facebook, right? We needed to find someone who could do that, who knew how to do that, and we've done that. In fact, he's one of our silent participants here, Matt Garcia Sierra. You introduced him earlier. I mean, just being able to do programs like this online gets us further than where we were before, where we were so reliant on face-to-face programming. This gives us a chance to, you know, reach a wider audience. One of my colleagues, Ellen Dornan, most of her time is spent in thinking about digital offerings, digital humanities offerings. So we're thinking in a lot of ways about how to grapple and address that issue. But I can also say, if you're interested in what we do, pass the word on to your friends and your networks. Let them know about the Humanities Council. I would say we're a diamond in the rough that way. More people can know about us, and I would love to have people who know about us be our ambassadors around the state.
I mean, I would just quickly, building on what Brandon was saying, I think we talked, you know, as a board during those strategic planning sessions. I think some of it also has to do with the size of the state, right? Not having large population centers. So the work that the Humanities Council does is distributed across a large variety of communities.
We're not Delaware, right? We're not Delaware. We're not Rhode Island. We're New Mexico.
And there's also, we're competing. For the size of our state, we have a lot of cultural products that we put out there: theater, dance, music, so many museums, universities. And I think a lot of people, if you mention, and I think this is a challenge for the council, is what the council does to support the institutions in those communities, they'd be like, oh, okay, you know, that, so it's not just simply the work the council does, but also the support it provides. You know, when I will admit, I was one of those people when I came on the board. I knew of the council primarily because it was a granting organization, and you know, when you're in the arts, you're always looking for places you can get some money. So, but then for example, I had no idea that the council was an organizer for National History Day, but that was something I participated in as a kid, but was not necessarily aware of the role the council played. So I think communications, I think it's really one of those, and you know, tooting your own horn a little bit, you know, kind of not waiting for people to acknowledge you. But I think in this climate now where presses and communications are so distributed, you need to jump up and down a little bit more than you maybe had to in the past to get people to realize the work that you've done. So.
You know, Arif, as a follow-up to that, I can't help but think about the relationship between this challenge that we're talking about and the role and function and the cost of higher education in this country. I mean, UNM is sort of comparatively speaking, a bargain for the kind of faculty and resources that you get there. But it's still a cost. And I've noticed more and more looking at college catalogs, college websites, that disciplines in the arts and humanities have had to pivot the way they market themselves. It's not enough to just say, we're offering a broad liberal arts education. We have to list the kinds of careers that you can go into if you get a fine arts major or a theater major. Frequently, that list has very little to do with the fine arts or theater. You know, you can still become a corporate executive. You can still go into the law or medicine with a fine arts degree. So I think that there's a sense that higher education is a real investment, and people are concerned about what they're getting in return for that investment, which I think makes the spreading of the liberal arts ideal very challenging right now.
Yeah,
Would that be fair to say?
I agree, and that's on a day where you mentioned that I just saw right before this that UNM had to do a modest raise in their tuition because of the cuts in state funding for this coming year. But I think cost has something to do with it, but I do think the siloing of disciplines within the universities, especially large ones, also have some things to contribute towards that. I went to a small liberal arts school because I wanted that well-rounded education where I got to experience a little bit of everything. But that's not necessarily the model in larger universities. Even at an undergraduate level, there's pressures to focus very early on. So, for example, we have some students who I played in my high school band. I want to be a pre-med major, but I would still have to have some connection to music because it means something to me. What are those opportunities within a music department or theater department or art department for students like that who aren't going to become professionals in that field, but who still want to be connected and who hopefully will become the future patrons of those fields and supporters, buy the tickets, show up to openings. So I do think there is the way the university system has evolved has also contributed to some of that as well.
I guess I was lucky in that no one was telling me when I was younger how bad the job outlook might be when I went into a humanities discipline, right? They didn't do it as an undergrad. They didn't do it in graduate school. During my PhD, I was the one who was sort of thinking, maybe this isn't going to work out, and maybe I need to double down and or at least look for other ways of thinking about a non-academic outcome. So maybe I was just naive, and my parents certainly weren't telling me. But I have to say, I think I think that the greatest value of a humanities education, or if we expand it a little bit, a liberal arts education, is the ability to think creatively and critically about life. I think those sorts of skills make good citizens, right? When we don't see when we don't just accept what's put in front of us, but we actually think about messaging around us, whether it's the commercials on television or the news article that we read. I think I'll go to my grave, sustaining that argument. In part because I've seen it in my own life, right? I've allowed I've pursued a career in the humanities, but I've also pursued a life in the humanities, right? I think overall, just to give you an example. So in trying to think about how to live a good life and how to deal with the sort of pitfalls that you know, we all experience the disappointments, as well as the, you know, the joys of life. I've turned to reading the Stoics, right? The old philosophers, Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers, Seneca, Epictetus, to try and think about how to deal with those kinds of issues in my own life. And the humanities, you know, through the Stoics have been useful, very useful for me, in living my life. That was not something that was introduced to me as a kid. I grew up in a very different context. You know, only when I started engaging with the humanities and working as a historian, and then reading broadly, that I, you know, that I think I was able to live a better, more meaningful life.
I'm going to turn to the chat room again. We have an affirmation along those lines from artist Deanna Molina, who's on the line with us. As an artist with exhibits and presentations supported by the New Mexico Humanities Council since 2006, I fully support bilingual programs and am a strong proponent of proactive partnership and measures to reach underserved communities with grassroots engagement that links to the virtual programming.
I think Deanna is coming out with a book shortly. Is that, am I getting that right?
She is. Deanna, would you like to tell us about it, or do you want to wait on that? She does have a book coming out, or
Yeah.
I think it is out.
It is out.
We'll have Deanna on this program 1 week from today.
That's right.
So this will be a chance to hear her talk about that and other things.
It's exciting.
The book is hot off the press, and it is one of the ties to one of the presentations through the New Mexico Humanities Council over the years. So it's
Great.
I am very grateful to the organization for the support in its development and ongoing sharing through the community.
Great. Thanks, Deanna. It's nice to have you on today.
And Deanna, your follow-up question we'll be taking up next week too, about the emphasis of environmentally related programming, because the environmental humanities, an interest of mine, is as a discipline and as an interest field, as a way of connecting the sciences and climate research with everything that it affects, is a hugely important new discipline. So we can talk more about that too. We have just another minute or two. Any final thoughts from those listening or those speaking?
I guess I would say we're always in listening mode. So if you know, if you're listening to this or watching this, either now or later when it's posted on YouTube, you have questions, or if you want to engage with the Humanities Council, or if you have ideas about how we can support humanities programming in your communities, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Arif, I'm sorry, did you have something to say? Did I step on your toes there, Arif?
Your comment was a little more, had a nice wrap-up appeal to it.
Oh,
but
okay.
Just following a little bit on what Deanna's question was, that coming from like a board perspective, I think that's why I'm interested in being on the board and being at tables like that, is you can help influence the work that the Humanities Council does and be supportive of, if say there are changes in the field and what institutions need not being so dug into the way it always was, and we have to keep that going, bringing in people who can provide different perspectives,
Yep.
who can comment upon say if it's a grant proposal from an organization, maybe that's not part of a traditional academic discipline, that's maybe more grassroots or community focused, having a range of voices and opinions and perspectives on the board is, that's where I think really a board can really influence the work of a institution like the Humanities Council.
I have a question, just to Brandon and Arif. I mean, some adversaries of the humanities say that basically, you know, that they want people to think like them and be like them by implementing the, you know, the humanities, you know, and institutionalize, not you know, bringing the humanities to them. I mean, what would you say to that, or what would your I mean, to that critique, you know, from people that you know, are sort of like against the humanities, I guess, in a way, the value of the humanities?
I think the humanities are capacious enough to include a variety of viewpoints. Something I was going to say before, you know, humanities are democratic with a small d. That is that, you know, anyone can participate and everyone does participate. You know, I was influenced early on by an essay written by Carl Becker, who was the president of the American Historical Association way back in the 40s. And he wrote he actually gave a presidential address, and then that was later published in the American Historical Quarterly as an essay. And I'm probably going to get the title wrong, but it was something like every man his own historian. This was before, you know, gender inclusive language became the norm. You know, we could retitle it "Every Person Their Own Historian." But his argument was that we're all historians. I mean, they're sort of a group of professional historians that go through sort of the, you know, the training, the academic training to, you know, to sort of put the, you know, the term doctor in front of their names. But when we record our lives, when we take out a pocketbook and we, you know, we record transactions, when we keep a journal or a diary, we're all essentially functioning as historians. We are creating a narrative about our, you know, about our lives, and that narrative can serve as a basis for, you know, future generations understanding us. But there's something sort of historical about the way that we live. That's always, you know, so I would say that's how I would respond to that question is, you know, we're all humanists. We may not identify as a professional humanist, but we're all, when we go to a museum and we look at a piece of art and we think about it and critique it and try to make it connect with our lives, we're a humanist. When we read a book and think about its contents, when we read a piece of fiction, and we have a conversation with our friends, we're doing the work of the humanities. Humanities does not have to be humanities with a capital H. And in fact, I would say it really isn't that, other than, you know, when it exists sort of in a professional or academic space. For what it's worth, that's how I would respond to it.
More to come and much to think about. Thank you, Arif, and thank you, Brandon, for joining us and making this such an interesting discussion.
Thanks, Ken.
A pleasure.
Thanks, Arif.
Thank you,
We're
Brandon.
very lucky. We're very lucky to have Arif as our chair of our board.
I'm sorry, you know, just before we go, I see one last hand raised. Patricia Largo, is that a question? Maybe just
An applause.
waving hello or some applause.
It was applause.
It was
Thank you,
applause.
Yes,
Oh,
thank you.
well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Patricia.
And those of you watching and listening, this show will be archived on our YouTube channel, so you can tell others to check it out there. And you can also tell them to join Deanna Molina and I next week on Starting Conversations for discussion about her work and her research. And we're looking forward to that very much. So once again, I'm Ken Watt for the New Mexico Humanities Council. Thank you for joining us on Starting Conversations, and take care, stay healthy, and we'll see you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.